Last night we did a survival winter camp out where we built snow forts and we slept in it. Myself, my brother, and 5 of our, children. And, they're all the ages like 5 to 10. And so I want to share with you in this video some safety tips and ideas on how to do this safely. So there are 3 things that, in my opinion, are the most big dangers with sleeping in a snow fort. Number 1 would be snow collapse. So if you build a fort and the walls aren't thick enough and the snow's not compacted and strong enough, or if it's somehow weakened, maybe you chisel too far when you're hollowing it out, snow collapse is a real threat. There are children every year who die from building snow forts that collapse on them. I do feel like if you do it in the right way, I feel like it can be safe, but I would recommend following a few rules of thumb. First one is I would recommend having a buddy system, meaning that if anyone is inside the snow fort, that they're never alone inside the snow fort, that they always have a buddy, maybe a buddy who's right on the outside of the snow fort. So if the snow fort were to collapse, they would be able to run and scream and tell adults about it. Going along with that, I would also recommend that children, school-age children, say ages 5 to 15, don't build snow forts by themselves, but that they have parent supervision. The reason I say that is most people who die, I would say, are children who are unsupervised, but they're old enough to go outside and play by themselves, and so their parents let them. But then there's an accident, and snow, it's ridiculous how much it insulates the sound, right? Like if this were to collapse on me, 1, it would probably weigh over 1,000 pounds of snow and ice that would be collapsing on me. So I'd be pinned down really good. But 2, people wouldn't be able to hear me scream because a foot of snow, like even with these huge openings on both sides of our snow fort here, I could hardly hear them being just outside of the snow fort last night, even when they were yelling or like making loud noises. So that's the first danger, is to take precautions against collapse. One idea of something you can do, I've seen another person do this on YouTube, but you can take, foot long or 18-inch long sticks and poke them through the edges of your snow fort. And if you do that, then when you are digging out the inside, once you see the ends of sticks, not to dig out anymore, because you want to have, at least a foot thick snow wall to kind of support the structure. I've got much thicker than a foot, I would say. Maybe on the thinner parts it's about a foot, but ours is probably a little thicker than that. This took me maybe about 2 hours to build, and I was shoveling a lot of snow. You can see over here all the snow that I shoveled from this area. So those are a couple precautions you can do to prevent against snow collapse. The other thing you can do that we did, I would recommend sleeping with your heads close to the exit. So for example, we were trying to fit 4 people in here last night, and this isn't a huge snow cave. You can see how big it is. It's not massive. The way we did it was we'd have our feet towards the middle and towards the edges, and our heads towards the 2 exits. And I like that idea because I would much rather have snow fort collapse on my legs and on my children's legs than on their heads. And so I would recommend considering that. If you have a 1 entrance or a 2 entrance snow fort, I would recommend putting your heads close to the exit. 1, it will give you a lot better ventilation, but 2, it will be a lot safer in the event of a snow fort collapse. The next big thing that I think is the biggest danger, another big danger of sleeping in a snow fort, is asphyxiation or the lack of oxygen. Let's say I only have 1 entrance here in my snow fort, and I'm curled up in there, and let's say it's a small hole. I could start using up that oxygen, and I could, get carbon dioxide poisoning, or, it could be dangerous. 2 things you can do to prevent against it. Well, you could have a bigger hole. That would be one way. You could have 2 holes where it's kind of like a tunnel fort, like ours is, where you've got more airflow. Another thing you could do is you could poke a hole through the top of your fort, a little vent hole. I've seen people recommend doing that to make sure that you have some ventilation. Another idea that I've seen is that you could have a lit candle that is running all night. That would provide you some warmth, but also if the candle starts flickering or goes out, then you know there might not be enough oxygen to breathe, and that can alert you. So those are just some ideas on how to prevent losing oxygen. The third danger, I would say, hey bud, how you doing?
Good.
Good. I'd say the third danger is exposure to cold. So, and I'd say maybe one of the biggest things to keep in mind when you're doing a winter camp out with your family in a snow fort is that the ground, it will sap the cold right out of you. Right now I'm sitting on the ground. The back part of me is like really cold right now, and it's getting like numbed as we speak. But if you put a mat under you, or even if you don't put a mat under you, you put a bunch of pine needles or leaves or cardboard or a mat or a towel or a blanket, something like that, I would highly, highly recommend. Because you'll notice that when you're sleeping at night, there's a few parts of you that are most likely to get cold. One would be any part of you that is directly laying on the ground. We slept in summer sleeping bags with our snow gear on, and we layered up with multiple layers of clothing. And I think that's the best way to stay warm, where you have like 3 pairs of pants on, or snow pants, and a couple of normal pairs of pants. You've got a few pairs of shirts on, maybe a couple jackets on. So if you're too hot, you can take off one layer, and if you're cold, you can add a new layer. If you don't have a layer of insulation between you and the ground, you're probably going to feel it really quick, and it's going to make you really cold. Another important thing is to wear, a hat. That keeps in a lot of your body heat. Another thing that I've noticed is that usually your toes get cold, especially if you have a summer sleeping bag that's only rated to like 50 degrees Fahrenheit like we do. And so you want to layer up and have, maybe 3 pairs of socks, or wrap an extra blanket around your feet. The other thing you want to keep an eye out for is if any of your children start to fall out of their sleeping bags. One of my nephews last night, his hands, he woke us up at 1 in the morning or so, and he was like, oh, my hands are cold. So we went right over to him. I gave him some these little hot snap pads where they're reusable and you can kind of snap them, and they do this chemical reaction to warm up your hands. Anyway, it's super cool. So I gave him a couple of those to warm up his hands, and then we gave him a pair of gloves that he could put over his hands, and then told him, to put his hands inside his sleeping bag, because I think they just got outside and were exposed outside of the sleeping bag. Obviously, if any one of your children are really young, they probably won't be old enough to communicate to you their physical needs. And so I probably wouldn't recommend doing a winter camp out with children under the age of 5. I just think it's too young. They won't really, if their feet go numb, they might not realize the danger as much as, say, a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old might. To be able to complain and communicate that to you. Another thing I'll mention about igloos or snow fort or Quinzees is that they actually trap in quite a bit of heat. So right now, if I went in the snow fort, we haven't been in the snow fort for like hours, right? Like we slept in here, and it's been probably about 6 hours since anyone's like been sleeping in there, right? But it still feels so much warmer in there than out here. Even though it's not in the sun, it's in the shade. It just blocks like the wind, so you don't feel like any wind. It's super still, and it just feels like it kind of reflects and traps in that heat. Another tip for preventing exposure: when you are hollowing out the inside of your snow fort, you might want to smooth it out, because it's possible that when you're breathing, that condensation will collect on the inside, or maybe even melt some of the inside of your snow fort. And that could drip down on you, like it could collect and drip on top of your sleeping bag or whatever. I would recommend having a big blanket that goes underneath you and your family, and a big blanket that goes over you. And it's always nice to have a couple extra blankets. It really, really is. When you're out here, you'll definitely appreciate it at nighttime to have an extra sleeping bag or an extra blanket to throw on top of someone who's a little bit cold. To recap, make sure that you've got buddy system going on, that you have plan. If there were to be a snow fort collapse, the children know exactly what they should do, where, they will alert you. They'll run and tell the family, the parents. Maybe build a snow fort where adults can always see it, and so they'll be able to tell visually if it's collapsed. I would recommend having your head towards the edge so you don't get crushed. Your head doesn't get crushed if the snow caves in. I also would recommend, I don't know if this is a good idea, but we compacted our snow a lot. So this snow fort is like rock solid, right? And the reason it's so solid is because we let the children climb on it. When I was piling on the snow, they were playing King of the Mount. So they were having a blast, pushing each other off and sliding down this hill. But I think that the compacted snow is a lot stronger structurally probably than just light fluffy snow that's not compacted.
There's one bad thing about that.
What's the bad thing about it?
It's harder to get out if it collapses.
Yeah, that's true. If it were to collapse, it would be heavier, but it's probably less likely to collapse because it's kind of like icy and super strong. So it's kind of a trade-off, but that would be my recommendation, is to maybe consider compacting the snow. And I thought it was going to be hard. I thought the snow was going to be hard to dig out, if it's compacted, but it actually wasn't. It wasn't hard at all. I just used a regular shovel, just like a spade shovel, and I was able to cut through. And actually, the hollowing out part, I'd say it took me about 2 hours to me personally make this big snow fort pile. I just shoveled a ton of snow. You can see all the way around here I shoveled just a ton of snow, but the hollowing out part probably took only like maybe 40 minutes to do it and completely hollow it out and get it ready for putting in a tarp and sleeping in it. If you're going to be building more than one fort like we were, where we had cousins and uncles, each sleeping with their families in their fort, I would recommend building the forts close to each other. So that way, if a fort were to collapse, it'd be a lot more likely that they could hear us scream, or we could hear them screaming for help if that were to be the case. Anyway, those are some ideas on how to be safe sleeping in a snow fort as a family, and I hope that's helpful for you, but please be careful. Okay, love you all. Take care.